We are streaming live on Facebook, and despite all of our pain in getting here, 15 minutes it took us to get this to work. But I am very excited to have Andy with us today. Andy and I have never actually chatted before, so you are about to see something beautiful happen as we get to know each other and answer all your questions. And I invited Andy onto this AMA for our first ever DPM members AMA because Andy is very passionate about Jira, and I think lots of PMs perhaps aren't so passionate about Jira. So I wanted to kind of dig a bit into what makes Andy tick, why he thinks Jira is such a great tool, and answer as many of your questions as we can. But yeah, Andy, do you want to just give us a bit of a background? I know we gave your bio in the sign-up page for this, but for those people who didn't read it yet, can you tell a bit about your story, what you've done, what you're doing now, and then we'll jump into Jira.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I think anything I say will only make myself seem less than that bio that you built up for me. So I'm afraid of what I'm going to say. No, yeah. So I got into web development. I don't know. It's been 6-7 years ago or so. As far as actually a career move, I was a backend developer, PHP databases, building business applications, BI, that kind of stuff. And it wasn't long before I got pulled into more of a manager role. And eventually at the agency I was at, I got pulled into being operations. And the first thing I did as operations was institute project management because there was none of that. And so by default, I became the project manager as well. And so that kind of started my role into project management. So I've always, as a project manager, I've always been part PM, part operations, and a little bit of developer on the side as well. And so that's where I was with my last company for the better part of the last 3 or 4 years. And then now with the company that I joined here in September.
So I have a question for you to start. As you talked about that role that you came in to a place where there wasn't project management, and you said you instituted project management. What did that look like, and what was that? Can you tell us about that process?
Yeah, I like processes, and there just wasn't a process in place. There was different ways of doing what some people might call project management. There was a person in a position that he was also the, I don't know, not really operations, but the boss's right-hand man. He was the design lead. He was also this, also that, and also, try to keep the projects going. But he didn't really have any concepts of what project management was. He didn't have any concepts of, people in the process. He didn't understand how to manage a project. He just thought I could come up with some deadlines and then keep on asking people where the project is, So every day we'd have a sit-down meeting, and he would go through every single task and ask the status of it and those kind of things. And just not really, and no fault of his, other than he just didn't understand how important project management was. And so when I came in, that's just what I started. I started saying we need a process. We need every single project. Here are the steps that we go through, and how do we do those, and where is this information at, and where is that information, and how do people know what to do next? And I always look at myself as operations, as setting my team up to succeed. And for people to succeed, they need clarity. And so for me, that's what a big piece of project management does, is it provides clarity for the team so that when they come to work every day, they know what they're supposed to be working on that day. They know what they're supposed to be working on the next day, et cetera, et cetera. And then as you go up to the hierarchy, the higher levels, they can look and see what is the team working on. And so your lead or your manager shouldn't have to bother you and say, what are you working on today? Or what are you going to be working on tomorrow? Or I wonder what, Bob's been working on over there. There should be processes and stuff in place to report that and to show, so everybody can easily understand, as far as getting things done, what's being done in the company.
Yeah, so that's cool. So in terms of that, so there was a guy there who's making, just checking in on people and asking whether or not it's done yet, which is like the minimum viable project, I guess, management technique. Right, yeah. So when you were documenting that process for the first time, or designing that process, how did you get alignment? Because I think this is true for lots of people who find themselves in an agency or an organization where the process is kind of like, well, we just kind of get it done. How did you use a whiteboard and try and draw it up and get everybody in a room, or did you design it and then try and get buy-in? What was that process? What did that look like for you?
It was a little bit of a hostile takeover. So a little bit of that, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, definitely kind of the guy who was my lead on the backend team. Obviously, I think I say obviously, but developers typically tend to think a little bit more organized and logically than other people, just because we have to for our code. Maybe I'm a little biased. I don't know. So, I mean, already we saw needs for a process in what we're doing, and logical decisions and stuff in what we were doing. And so, being in the developer world, we both came from outside the company. A lot of other people in the company kind of grew up with the company, kind of earned their stripes within the company itself. And so they weren't so aware of the big picture of what was out there in the tech world. And so he and I came together and we started looking at different systems that we knew that were in place out there and comparing and just saying, what do we need for our team? And looking at, products out there and saying, well, that's way too much than what we need. Anything from version control to actual project management, task management, forecasting, that kind of stuff. And so once we kind of settled on a direction we wanted to take, or I wanted to take, then, it's kind of sales. You go into a salesman mentality where you find the need. And so, the whole team understood the need. We were behind in projects. Projects were not succeeding. They weren't finishing within scope. They weren't finishing within budget. They were running over. We would launch stuff, and it was obvious that all the requirements of the project weren't even met because they weren't even written down in the beginning. And so the client would just mention things that weren't in the website or weren't in the project. And they're just like, well, we talked about those in those meetings. Didn't you write them down? Those kind of things. So there was a very obvious need for it. Yeah. And from there, it was just a matter of kind of presenting the plan to everybody. And again, going back to that clarity, just like I did recently when I implemented Jira, the team I'm at with now, it's a lot of prep work and a lot of preparation for selling the team on it. So I look at all the individual members in our team. Again, typically I work with smaller teams. So, I've got designers to consider. I've got the boss to consider, the owner. I've got different leads, different positions that I look at and just say, why is this good for them? How does this fulfill a need they have? How will they use it? What will they not like about it? Kind of going ahead and answering those questions ahead of time and presenting it. Not overburdening them, letting them explore it a little bit, and then answering their questions and hopefully being prepared to answer their questions as they come.
Yeah. I think the reason I wanted to dig into process at the beginning, because in my experience of Jira, having clarity around the process is super important to making Jira function. And I think if you're not clear going into using Jira, what your process really is and how work moves through an organization or even through a team to from brief through to going live and being built, QA'd, and that process for deployment. If you're not clear about that, Jira is a disaster. So I know we've got some questions coming in here on the Q&A, which I want to get to in a second. But do you want to just talk us through, I know you recently did a Jira implementation where you did this. You convinced the team that this was a good tool and you built a workflow. But can you talk us through like why you love Jira, why you think it's a good tool for building out process and managing projects?
Sure. Yeah. I think I was a little surprised when the title of this was "I Love Jira." I'm not sure that I love Jira to that extent. But I do.
More than anyone else.
Yeah, exactly. I do enjoy using it. And I will say from the beginning, this was a recent conversation on the Slack channel. I think Jira is a tool in a PM's toolbox. It is not the tool. Personally, I don't think anything is the tool. There's no one good tool out there that you can completely use to manage everything you have to do as a PM. Maybe somebody's found one, maybe they've made it work for them. But for me, I come into stuff with I look at our processes and I look at what needs to be done and then I build a workflow around that, and then I see what tools help me accomplish that. Versus some of these other ones that are, other tools out there that are very clear and very honest that they have a methodology that they impose within the software, and then you kind of build your workflow around that methodology.
Yeah.
And some people are fine with that, and that works for some people, and it can be a great guidance for some people. It can give them a good starting place, especially if they're not familiar with how to implement PM or what all they need or what all the challenges they're going to face. And that can be a big help. For me, I like to find tools that help accomplish my goals and my pain points that I see. So that's when came in with Jira. The team, we're really just a development agency. We have a lot of add-ons for Expression Engine CMS. And then we just recently acquired Expression Engine CMS, which added a whole nother layer to what we do. And then we also have client services project, building applications and stuff like that. So I was looking at everything was kind of managed in multiple places. We were either using clients' tools that they would send us, so they would invite us to Basecamp, teamwork, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Or we were doing it in GitHub issues, which is okay for some things. There was issues in Slack. There were issues in email. It was just really all over the place. And there wasn't visibility. There wasn't clarity. For myself as a project manager, when this team had never had a project manager, the boss kind of, Tom hired me and he's like, all right, I got a project manager. And I'm like, how on earth do I even know what to manage right now? Like, how do you even know what's going on? And so some of implementing Jira is a little bit of a bias. I've been working in it in the last 5 years and, 4 or 5 years, and I love it. I enjoy it. And some of it, though, is I think it's a great tool for the way that I think and the way that I manage teams and projects, which is, again, that Jira, it's a little bit agnostic as far as what your workflow is. It's definitely strong on the agile Scrum pieces and has a lot of stuff built in for that, which I don't even really touch any of the Scrum stuff that much in there. So if you're going to ask me about implementing all the reports and burn down charts and everything else that's in there, I probably won't be much help because I don't touch a lot of that. And that's the great thing about Jira is it can also be very vanilla, and you set it up for the way that you want to work and the way you do things. And so that's why I find it really pleasing. And it doesn't have a lot of extra stuff built into it that they put up front. So it's very powerful in the back end. Lots of stuff you can do in it. But that's not all up front in your face trying to take over what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. So I can very much structure it to where I just see my issue list, or I just see the Kanban board, or I just see what my dashboards, whatever I'm going after. And then I structure the projects and the workflows and everything the way that I want to.
Cool. And I think for some people, yeah, obviously that blank slate is a joy. And for other people, if you've been tasked with, okay, implement Jira, it can be really, really scary. And it can often be the case that no one actually knows how to set it up properly. When you're trying to create a new board, there's only one person who can do it. But I don't know if you can do a show and tell at all, like live with us now.
Well, we were lucky to even connect to this webinar, so we can try this. But
yeah, I know in the top there next to the camera, there's a plus, and you should be able to share your screen. But it'd be good to see, like, when you're talking about building out a workflow, what that looks like, and kind of explaining how you've customized it, and then maybe we can come to some of these questions. There's some great questions coming in, so yeah, guys, keep putting the questions in. We'll do this kind of show and tell, and then hopefully we'll get to some of those questions. But some of the questions, Andy, I don't know if you can see them, but we've had questions coming in around managing people's suggestions in Jira, applying PM processes in an agile context, and people coming into a situation where there's convoluted workflows that they're now responsible for. What should you do about it? But yeah, if you can kind of give us just an overview for people who are maybe new to Jira of like how you've set this up, and then we can dive into some of those.
Yeah, sure. And I fully agree with you as far as people being scared of it, because you just don't know where to start in Jira. And to me, actually, before I was in development, I was a professional photo retoucher and did everything in Photoshop. And Photoshop to me is one of those apps too, where if you load up Photoshop for the first time, you just have tons of tools. You know there's tons of power, but you don't know where to start. And for me, Jira can kind of be that same thing where you get in here and you're just not sure exactly where to start. And unfortunately for Jira, there's a lot of legacy documentation. There's a lot of legacy, the way things used to be done. So when you're searching the internet for help, even on Jira's or Atlassian's own site, it can be hard to track down what's the current workflow, all that. And even when I spun up a clone of my actual Jira instance, so this is not my actual day-to-day Jira instance, and lo and behold, they've changed the navigation just within the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to try to work through this, but I can't figure out if I can. I couldn't figure out if I could go back to the old navigation on here. So it's actually kind of nice. I like the new navigation, but it's just different than what it was. And that unfortunately is a pain point for Jira. They're constantly iterating, constantly coming out with new stuff. And then you have the server the self-hosted Jira instances versus the cloud instance, and what can you do where, and those kind of things. So for me, it helped a little bit this time because I've been working in Jira in the past where I kind of knew where to attack things. And so the way that I set up Jira is, again, clarity is my goal. So what's my goal in Jira? My goal for implementing Jira is so that I can have clarity on what the entire team is working on right now at this moment. It's not a forecasting tool for me. It's not a planning tool for deadlines, that kind of stuff. Very rarely right now on our team do I even use the deadline dates and that kind of stuff on the tickets themselves. Now, my previous agency, I did a lot of that because the team was used to that and they gotten used to that. And so they knew on the Jira tickets when stuff was due, all that kind of stuff. And then we actually use Smartsheet for actually forecasting stuff out. And I go back and forth between Smartsheet and Jira. So for me, what I'm looking at when I come into Jira is I'm trying to see what is on the team's plate right now. So when the boss man comes to me and he says, we need to do XYZ feature and I want it done Thursday, then I can pull up Jira and I can tell him, well, that's great, but what are we going to move around so that we can get XYZ feature done? Before, there was no insight into that. So he would just be able to say that, and it was kind of like, okay, I'll start working on that, and people would just forget what was being worked on already. Or he wouldn't have insight into that. So what I want to do is I want to be able to come into Jira and I want to say, all right, Tom, where do you want, what do you want to push down? Where do you want to push back and delay so that we can get this feature in as soon as possible? And now there's no way to argue with the data. There's no way to argue and look at this and say, well, he's not really working on that. Well, yes, he is, because it's right there on his board. Or you can say, you have to say, I want him to stop working on this so that we can work on that. So that's kind of my goal with Jira. That's what I want to see. And that's what I want to be able to do at a basic level with Jira. And so that's where the Kanban boards come in handy for me. And so what I typically do is, you can see in projects and then all projects, I have all of our projects listed out in here. And so we have every add-on that we develop is an individual project. Obviously, Expression Engine itself is an individual project. Then we have client services projects, those kind of things. And I'm also a big fan of basically personal to-do boards in Jira as well. So everybody gets a project on the team, gets a project in Jira that has the same setup as one of our other projects. And so that way they can assign, as they are assigned tasks that maybe aren't related to a project, those get put on their board as well. So that could include personal development, professional development, that it could include just miscellaneous office tasks they have to take care of. Again, if you're not putting all that stuff into Jira, how can I see everything that's on their plate right now? So if I've told them they need to do a certain amount of training or they need to do something else, and that doesn't get into Jira, then I can't really see everything that's on their plate. So again, that may be something because, again, I work with small teams. It's easier for me to do. But I'm a big fan of being able to see that within Jira itself. And again, that goes back to why do I even use Jira in the first place? And so what I do is I have 3 buckets, if you want to call them that, of projects. So I have what we call our product projects. So those are projects for product-based things that we have going on. And then we have our client services projects. And then we have business-based projects, which our business would be just administrative tasks for ourselves. It's general packet tied things that you have to do for the business, things that aren't related to the other ones. And so those they're very similar, but they have different issue types, they have different workflows, those kind of pieces as well. So that's where it starts. Is I have those different type of projects, and so then I set up templates. So I set up, Jira doesn't have necessarily a true template for the projects. So what I do is I create a base project. So you can see here's my base client services project and my base product project. And so whenever I create a project, what Jira lets you do is if I come to project and create project, tell me if I'm talking too fast. I love Jira, so I get excited about it. Right?
Yeah, this is good. It's a good place.
So I go to create project. I type in my name and my key, and then I can do share settings with an existing project. And so this is something that Jira has instituted over the last couple of years, which was a great add-on here. And I can choose my base project here. And so I know that when I create this new project, it's going to have all the same settings, everything else that I've worked so hard on to set up for my base client services project. Or my base product. I don't have to worry about the templates, any of that kind of stuff. So other stuff other than just having a project, Jira. I don't know how much you want to dive into actual workflows and those kind of things. That's where Jira gets really complicated. Is when you start diving into workflows. So I will show you my workflow for like base project here. Where do I go now in the new navigation? So if I go to issues, and so I basically cheat the system with my workflows, to be honest, because we don't have a need in our systems to define that something can only go to in review after it's done XYZ.
Right.
Or stuff like that. So Jira can be very horizontal, very lateral, where you can only go to a done status if you have gone from to do, in progress, in review, now done.
Yeah.
And you can dictate all that. But honestly, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's been my experience. People have set up workflows, and then everyone's fudging it because they want to move the card. And so then you have to go through the process, like you fudge the process, but just by changing the status of your tickets or moving it to this part, when it's like, we didn't really do that, but we just need to get it out of the way.
Right. And, and if that's what you need, certain companies need that. And for certain stuff, you need that. And and you just define that. And that should be a process that's written down. That's where the operations part of it comes in, that people should have that somewhere that says, this is the process to make this happen. And they should understand why it's set up like that. But honestly, for me, again, before this, I worked at a digital marketing agency, and now we're doing products and client service work here where I'm at. And I set up this right away. Everything can transition to everything. I have all my statuses, and the workflows are everything, if you're not familiar with this, all here means like from any status, it can transition to this status over here. So this is some pre-built workflow stuff that's already in Jira, and I just tack onto it all to everything. Because I think that's a big hindrance, especially if you don't need it and you don't have reasons for it. Then again, it just causes confusion. And I think that was one of the Q&As where somebody said, they've come in and there's all these complicated workflows. How do you clean that up? And unfortunately, that's where it's just manual. You've got to go into the workflows and you've got to straighten that stuff out. One thing. Go ahead.
Yeah. So for Patrice, who's saying, what advice would you give to someone coming into a new company with a convoluted Jira workflow they're now responsible for? Is it better to burn it down and start over, or is that too extreme? I guess it depends how convoluted that workflow is, because what you're saying here is one really quick fix or hack could be just to change those permissions, right?
Right.
But do you think? I mean, what you're advocating for is almost no workflow that's kind of built into the tool. But what would your advice be?
First understand why are those workflows in place the way they are. I think that's a huge thing is not just to come in as the new project manager and say, this is messed up, I don't like this. Why is it like that? And the truth may be that, somebody started with Jira and they just started duct tape on top of Band-Aid on top of whatever, trying to get this stuff to work, and they didn't know what they were doing. And in that case, yeah, it's probably better to burn it down and start over again. I mean, deleting a workflow does not delete your project or any of the data in your project by any means. So it's perfectly fine. And in fact, Jira, when you first start with Jira, when you create a new project, it'll create a new workflow. It'll create the default workflow scheme on every project you do. And it will create like a new workflow scheme based on, we have eBiz, eCore, whatever, campaigns, binder, all these projects we have, and it will create a new line item on here. And so you'll have, if you have 100 projects, you have 100 different workflow schemes. So that's one thing that I do is I create this base workflow scheme for my different project buckets. And then I assign all these projects to that same bucket. And so that way I don't have to, if I change this workflow scheme, it automatically changes for all of our products or product projects. I don't have to go into 80 different projects and change that workflow scheme to do that. So that's really important, and again, if you have something that has 80 projects in it, that's just going to take time to clean that up and to reassign all that. And it's just one of those things where you've just got to eat that frog and just do it one day. You just got to close your door, put your Slack on do not disturb and just crank through it and get it done. Because there's no fast way to do that. There's automation and you can use like the CLI if you really want to get into stuff, but in general, just the blanket, using Jira as it is, there's no quick way to get through that other than just sit down and do it.
Yeah. And one question that Rodrigo had was, how do you manage people's suggestions in Jira, i.e. suggestions regarding workflows, statuses, etc.? Because obviously everybody has different ways they like to work. What you're talking about is, and I like this way that you've structured it so that you can, it's like a cascading Jira workflow so that everything, you can change it in one place and it's impacting everything. But obviously, when you implement a new process and a new tool, there are things people like, things that people don't like. How do you kind of create this, synergy within the team that, bringing people together, kind of trying to accommodate needs and wants, and without making this whole thing a complete mess?
Sure. And again, I think, I'm very honest in that I work with small teams.
Yeah.
So I'll say that first and foremost, I'm not managing 200 people in Jira. And I do understand and recognize that may be a benefit for me in using the system. But as, when I implement something again, the first reason I do it is I have a why behind it and I have reasons. And so if somebody, I have a job to do and my job is to manage that workflow and to give them clarity. And so I make sure that they understand I'm doing this for the company as a whole. I'm doing this for you guys. I'm not doing this for me. I think you even had in my bio, that I go from, a shipmate myself kind of mentality where, the first thing I look at is when I implement something, is it good for the ship? Is it good for everybody? Is this helping out our goal as a company? What is our goal as a company? And so then I look at my shipmates, I look at my other team members, and I say, again, I think I mentioned this before, but how is this going to impact their day-to-day life? How is this going to help them? What is this going to do for them? How is this going to benefit them? And then lastly is like, does it benefit me as a project manager? Does this give me my clarity? How does it benefit me? Because if it's something that works great for you, but your team's going to hate it, or it's going to add hours to their day, then you'll never be able to get that implemented. You'll constantly be up against a wall, constantly get frustrated. So when I present this to people, I present this to them and the team. We have a big team meeting. I wrote up, just like a 10 or 15 page intro to Jira kind of thing of not really a how-to, but more of a how do we use it at Packetide, and stuff that's in Jira that they can look for, those kind of pieces. And I make sure, again, it goes back to sales. I'm selling it to them as this is filling a need that you have. You have come to me and said, this is an issue you have, and I'm trying to solve this issue with this, and this is how it works. So, and I tell them, this is living and breathing, continuous improvement in your workflows all the time. You've got to try something, you've got to track it, you've got to analyze it and then respond to it. And so they know that if they come to me and they say, I don't like this status name, I think that's a stupid status name. Okay, well, great. Well, thanks for your suggestion. That's wonderful. Why do you think it is? Well, I think it's confusing. Great. Let's have a conversation about it. And then I'll track that for a while. Does anybody else hate it? Does anybody else say anything about it? And then I'll decide on a decision. I'll come back to them. But like, nobody else had a problem with it. I even talked to these other people, and they said they really liked it. I think it works for what it is, but I don't think we're going to change that at this time. Same thing with workflows, all that. Guys, if you don't like how we're doing something, let me know. I don't live in a bubble. I'm not the perfect project manager. I'm not the perfect implementer. Our stuff changes, and our mindset changes, and things we do changes. And so if we need to change something, then just let me know. And again, that goes back to how I set up Jira, where, as you just mentioned here with the workflow schemes, and I do that with everything else, that it's easy for me to make changes as, the team says we need to change this. And we analyze that and we respond to it and saying, yes, indeed, we do need to make that change to how we're working within Jira.
Yeah. Cool. Rodrigo, I hope that answers your question. And I think what we kind of, this kind of touches on another question that Rodrigo had that I think is interesting. And I don't know if this is like a Jira question, and so I don't understand it. But he says, challenges of replicating process in Jira. I don't know if you can expand on that, Rodrigo, at all in the chat. But what I think you've been showing us in this workflow is actually, can you take us back to your project where you had quite a simple Kanban process? And what I'm curious about is how, you said you worked in an agency before, and one of the challenges that I've had, Rodrigo, hope I'm not stealing your question, but is developers tend to really like Jira, but strategy, UX design, before we get to development, it can be really hard getting anyone else apart from the developers in QA on board with using Jira. So I don't know, Rodrigo, if this was your question in terms of replicating process, but how have you worked with more diverse teams than just developers in QA to make it work for them too?
Yeah, so especially at my other agency, we worked in pods where each pod was a designer, a developer, and a content writer, and a marketing strategist. And so we had different, jobs, different people, different mindsets, all working within Jira for the process. And so that is tough because, even when I first implemented Jira, it was, okay, is that a ticket or is it an issue? And what's the difference? Because the customer service people and the account managers had one thought, and then developers called it something else. Am I still good? You froze on me, Ben. I'm going to keep on going, just hoping this is recording. So, so again, that comes down to how does the team look? And I think that may be part of his question there, or her question, where it is, taking how the team works together and moving that into a digital format on Jira. And so that's where it comes into the columns and the Kanban board or statuses. And, how would you guys normally move an issue around? How would you guys normally take an issue, go through the entire workflow and get to done? And so the Kanban board here, you can go into board settings and you can change the names of these columns and what statuses are actually in a column. And so that's under board settings. And then you assign statuses to that column. And so that allows me to take an issue for the project. And so if I go to columns, you can see some of these columns have multiple issues in there. So for instance, done is duplicate, that's done, won't fix, in review testing. And so as an issue is assigned, then we work through that and they move those cards from one status or one column to the next, just like they would when they hand it off. And they also reassign the tickets, they hand it back and forth, they comment on the tickets so that the team knows who's supposed to be working on what and the current status of that item. I think we lost Ben here, so I'm not sure. We'll check Slack here and see if are you guys here? Can anybody chat or say anything to let me know that you guys are still here?
Yeah, I think we are still here.
Okay.
Yeah, you're still here, and producer's just saying, yeah, just keep going, because I think Ben has gone, but yeah, everyone's still here. Keep going.
Okay. So have you guys got any more questions about Jira? I love Jira. I'll just keep on talking about this for a minute. So we've got the columns that easily lets you move cards back and forth. People are fairly familiar with that. That's pretty much been implemented across a lot of PM tools these days. And then in the Kanban board, we also have filters. So again, this is in the quick settings there. So I have certain filters that I have set up. So right now, we have a new version of our software coming out that is E6. We're really excited about it. So I've got everything that's related to the E6 version here. And then I've got, so people can just come in here and they can quickly filter down to what they're working on. Likewise, they can come in here and filter to certain people. So if I just want to see what, there I am in 6.0, then this is all the issues that I have to work on right now. So it's really easy for a team member to come in and just see specifically what issues they're working on. And the great thing about the Kanban boards in Jira is they're very flexible. Now, I will say that this is when you're using the classic software project in Jira. Jira has some new things out there with some the business projects and templates, and then also the next gen projects. I do stay away from those. I like the idea behind the next gen projects because they're very flexible. It kind of takes all the whole workflow administration piece out of everything. It allows anybody to admin anything. I like the idea of the templates because they're kind of predefined processes to help you so you don't start with a blank slate. Unfortunately, I use it again for this clarity in the Kanban board view, and those don't play nice with this view because what we're looking at here right now is an individual project. So this is our Expression Engine core project. However, the power of the Kanban boards also comes where I can have one board that has multiple projects in it. So it'll probably take a second to load. While it does, welcome back, Ben. We just kept on going without you.
Yeah, thanks. Good idea.
Sometimes things like that happen in projects and you keep on going. So what this is this is actually a Kanban board I created, and it includes every project that we have in our system. Now, this is typically very big. So for one thing, I don't have done on here. It's only in progress tickets. But if I wanted to see what the entire team is working on, this gives me access to every ticket that everybody's working on in the system right now. Now, it uses the same board structure as the smaller projects. So I'm very big on keeping that consistency. And then what I can come in here, again, you're loading up hundreds of issues, so it takes a minute to load. And then what I can do is I can quickly come in here and just see, for instance, Matt here. I can click on Matt's name. I don't even know if he has much that he's working on right now. And it will filter this board down to just his task. And so if I'm wondering what's on Matt's plate right now across all the projects in our system, I just come to this one board, I filter to Matt, and I see what he's working on right now. And again, likewise, I can do quick filter, so I can filter down for only my issues. I can do upgrade projects, business projects, Expression Engine based projects, whatever kind of quick filters I want to come up with. And again, those are all based on another powerful feature of Jira, which is the issue search, and using JQL and save filters to create complex queries and then create boards and views and dashboards based on those filters that you create. So I'd really urge you, I think that's a little bit deeper than today's conversation, but I'd really urge you to go and learn about, how to write those JQL queries and how to save your filters. And then you can create views and boards and everything based against those. But again, a lot of this goes back to, I stick to the basic software, traditional, or I think it's called classic Jira projects. And that allows me the greatest flexibility to be able to pull everything together the way that I want to pull it together.
That's cool.
I'm just going over all the Kanban board stuff and how I use it, Ben. So
yeah, nice. Did you? So I missed the bit where you're talking about trying to get teams beyond just development to engage with this, and you were talking about pods. And so, were you able to get all all of your team
Mhm.
working in Jira? Because I think one of the challenges can be Jira is very much orientated towards, user stories, acceptance criteria, that kind of thing, which is harder for a designer to wrap their head around.
Yeah, and again, that's where Jira's a blank slate. At my previous agency, I never created a user story or an epic or anything else. Period. Never used it. We didn't do release planning. We didn't do anything else like that. I used releases in the Kanban board just to clear it, and I'd release it and say this is product launch, or this is. We had a lot of people on retainer, so monthly I'd clear the board and call that a release for all the stuff we worked on that retainer for the month. But it's funny because when I implemented Jira at my previous agency, everybody said, that's not going to work. Everybody, the people I was talking to said, that's not going to work because it's developer focused. I went to implement Jira at Packetide at my current place, and they told me that's not for developers. Developers hate it. So, everybody has their own viewpoint, I guess, on what it's made for or whatever. But what I was saying while you were gone there was, I go to the team and I say, how do we normally work on an issue? If there's something to be done, how does that normally work? And so they tell me, well, normally the strategist will come up with the idea and they'll have a meeting with the designer, and then the designer will come up with a sketch or whatever, and they'll pass it off to this person for review, and then they'll do this. And so I take all that, I write that down, and then you just turn that into the process in Jira. And so that's where these columns come in, where, an issue starts and it goes through and people reassign the ticket. So, if it starts with the designer, when it's in progress, it might get reassigned to the developer to do something on, and then pass off to review. And then, so a ticket, it's not stationary. It's a living and breathing thing where people are commenting. They're having asynchronous discussions on it. It's getting assigned to different parties. We kind of, that's in my introduction document where I tell people, essentially, when do you reassign it, when you don't? If you're, when do you move it to, we have an on hold status. So if it's something that, I try to keep a little bit of the Kanban methodology, I don't follow it by the line here, but it's, I don't want people to have 10 items in progress at a time, because that's just not reasonable. You're not working on 10 items in progress at a time. Yeah. So if it's something they're not working on, then they're allowed to move it to on hold while they're waiting for a larger discussion to happen, while they're waiting for bigger feedback to happen, something like that. If it's just something that they need some help, they can tag the person in the comment, and the person can comment back and they can continue on their ticket. But if they know this is something that's going to be a larger project or a process, then they can reassign it to that person completely and get it off of their plate, or they can move it on hold while a conversation's happening. We have like an in discussion label where people can quickly see all the tickets that are in discussion right now and join in those discussions. It really allows us to have those asynchronous discussions, which are great for now. Most of the world's a remote team right now. So you can have those comments and those conversations when it's best for you to get in there and comment on it. So.
That's cool. Yeah, I think what you've demonstrated here is actually how Jira can be more flexible, probably than many of the implementations that we've been involved in. So I think that's been really helpful. I know there's a question here that says, it would be good to know how to structure a project with tasks that maybe are 3 or 4 levels deep. And I'm guessing what Alison is talking about here is, traditionally, well, maybe not traditionally, typically in Jira, I'll say, people will have epics, then they'll have stories. And that's one way to structure tasks, is by creating a hierarchy. The epic is the bigger story that all these user stories are kind of playing into, which might be something like, I don't know, build the navigation could be an epic, for example. And then each of the stories that go into that feed into that, building this piece of functionality, the larger functionality. So that's one way to structure. But how do you provide structure to these tasks that you're adding into your board? Yeah,
so essentially, I've started to use stories, not so much epics for our expression engine product, because that's a big thing. So we have stuff like, we want to improve the control panel view. A user should be able to come to the control panel and do XYZ, and then actually break that into tasks, and the tasks are the actual things that developers are going to do. And in fact, I have those hidden from the team because there's no reason for them to normally see the epic or the story on a day-to-day basis. It just confuse them as far as, is that something for me to do or not do? They just see the task. So that is helpful with that. With actual task and getting things done, I keep it to a main task and subtask. And so from there, you might have something where it's, what's an actual task? So like this up here on our screen is create a page for a marketing page for the pro version. So that's a new feature we're adding. And there are several things that might have to be done on that. For developers, unfortunately, we're not the most structured when it comes to UI and UX for a marketing page. So that's a lot simpler than, what it would have been at the marketing agency for us to do. We're just going to use a template, fill in the content, that kind of stuff. So that might have 3 or 4 subtasks underneath of that. And those different subtasks are assigned to different people. Epic stories or parent tasks are normally always assigned to me as project manager. So everybody does the task. I use the automation built into Jira to notify me when all subtasks are complete. And so I get a nice little email that says, these tasks are complete. This should have rectified or resolved the parent task. You can go check that, and then I'll go through that daily and check all those parent tasks and mark them as done if the whole task as a whole is done on that. From there, it's using the links. So Jira has a really good link structure, which can be very handy. So I'm going to try to bring this up here. By the way, this little jump menu, this little thing is very handy in Jira if you don't know about that. On the traditional projects, you just press the dot key and type in any command you want for a lot of stuff. This is, let me just go to a project view here. Is this not linked? Of course, live TV here, right? But anyways, you can link tickets that say, this ticket blocks another task, or is blocked by this other task, or it just relates to it, or it's duplicated by those kind of features. And so those are very helpful. And again, I use automation in Jira for blocking tasks, where if something has to be done before this other ticket could be worked on, then it's blocked by that other ticket. And so when that other ticket is resolved, Jira notifies whoever's assigned the other one and says, hey, ticket number 1, 2, 3, 4 is done. Your ticket 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 can now be worked on. Because there's no process of hiding those automatically in Jira until it's unblocked, at least that I don't know of. And so you can't really hide it and then just show up when it's unblocked. But you can go ahead and prep all these tickets, and just the user knows when they go to work on their task that it's blocked by another ticket. And that shows up all, right. When you have different stuff like that, that shows up all here on the issue view for you. So,
yeah, that's cool. I hope that answers the question, Alison, for you. We're going to take, I know we're over time. Alison's quickly just asking, do you use work logs? And are you, Alison, by that meaning like time tracking, or is there something else in Jira that I'm not?
Oh yeah, time tracking.
Yeah. So
there's lots of right.
Yeah, at my current company, we don't use the time tracking because we already had a time tracking tool that we've been using. We use Harpoon, which we happen to own as well, that goes into the company's P&L and gives insight into as far as business, and it's all tied in. So I'm petitioning for a integration with Jira that would allow us to use the time tracking in Jira and that go to Harpoon. At my previous company, though, yes, we definitely used the time tracking tool within Jira. It's quite easy to just to start and stop the timers. We used an add-on called AIO Timesheets, which was fantastic for being able to quickly pull time data based on projects or issues, those kind of things. So we actually worked on a lot of retainers and for marketing retainers, and we had to track to make sure that projects weren't going over budget. And so monthly, what I did was I actually was able to export from AIO timesheets into a spreadsheet I had that would pull in the data from HubSpot with their contracts and everything. And it would tell me if they were over budget, all that. And it was actually pretty automated that I could do that on a daily basis if I wanted to, and check for budgets. So yes, definitely. I love the time tracking. Well, I don't, yeah, I enjoy using it and it works well. And add-ons like AIO timesheets. That was one of the more simpler ones. You can get into Tempo and all those other that are way more complex.
Yeah.
But I think it does a fantastic job for what it's trying to do. So.
Yeah, I just want to finish with this question, which is kind of linked to timesheets, I think. So Thomas was asking, how do you overcome the challenges of applying PM processes in an agile context? And I'm not entirely sure what challenges you're talking about and what PM processes you're talking about, but maybe what this question is about are things like managing and controlling the project, where how do you, and you talked about working with Smartsheet and kind of managing, timelines, delivery through Smartsheet. But I think, one of the challenges with Jira is that maybe you feel like as a project manager, you're not entirely sure, you don't get that kind of big picture view of where the project's at, because you end up with all these cards with stories in them. You talked about linking them together, and that's one way that you can kind of see how things, you can go in a card and see what the blockers are or how they're related to one another. But in terms of managing in your Kanban board, your schedule, your budget, the scope of the project, maybe that's what he's talking about with PM processes. I don't know. How do you marry those two things together and pull the relevant information out apart from time tracking, which you just talked about?
Yeah. The big picture the big picture for me in Jira is always what's on the team's plate, but also what's left in the project itself. So using releases, using labels, those kind of things are very helpful. And then using the quick filters along with that. So for instance, right now I have a quick filter selected for, it looks like 6.0. I think I'm going to clear this. Oh, it's only my issues in 6.0. That's why there's nothing there. So, but what we have is we have releases. So if I want to see what's left for, let's say 6.0 alpha, which if anybody from the community is watching, they'd be excited because we're about to be done with this. But I can see here, I can just filter on that. And that takes all those tickets, hundreds of tickets for Expression Engine that we're working on in the future, and knocks it down to just these few tickets. So when we're talking as a company and we're saying what is left to get done with alpha, then I can come here and quickly click on my filter for that, which is just based on the 6.0 alpha label, and say, we've got 2 tickets to work on. These ones are in review. They're all in pull requests right now. And then we'll be ready to talk about launch, guys. That's all there is to it. And same thing with anything else. If we're doing releases, I've got 6.0. So that's really how I see as far as what's left in the project, what's the big picture, timeline, those kind of things. We don't work on any projects where we're dead set with our timelines. Even client services, we have some basis. Those are managed external to the project. So I have those in, I don't use Smartsheet here. I just use a Google Sheet or Sheets. Right. That have that data in there. And so part of my job as project manager, I feel, is to constantly keep eyes on this. I have not discovered a way to be super automated as a project manager when it comes to just seeing what's going on in the company and seeing what's going on in projects. So I look and I just come in here and I say, what is done with XYZ, with this project, how much is left on it? Hey, we're trying to hit next week. What's left? Okay, I've talked to these guys. I might put estimated time. Jira has the estimated time availability on there where you can put original time estimates. So I know how long I think it's going to take. If you're using time tracking along with that, that's a big help because you can see that they said it was going to be 6 hours. They've already used 5 hours. That helps a lot with that process as well. And then, if you have a bigger implementation, then you can really use your dashboards. Jira integrates with a lot of third parties. So you can actually, if you want to use something like Smartsheet dashboards that they have, which are great for seeing the big picture on projects, you can actually have your tickets and everything, your issues pull into Smartsheet, and then that would generate your dashboard for you over there as far as time tracking, cost, if you have a way to tie that in, what's left, what's in progress, all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah. Cool. Well, I know we're 10 minutes over, so we are going to wrap things up there. Andy, I just want to say a massive thank you for battling through the challenges of Big Marker and for sharing all that you've shared today. I think it's been enlightening. Thank you all for your questions as well. For those of you who have been watching today, thank you for bearing with us as we got this live. We'd love it if we could, if you could give us some feedback. I'm going to stick a link in here. And the cool thing is that every time we get some feedback, we get to plant a tree as well. So if you can leave us some feedback, for every bit of feedback, we plant a tree. So please do that. But yeah, Andy, thanks for joining us. Thank you all for attending, for your great questions. This was fun. I'm sorry it was a bit hard to get going at the beginning. We'll try and somehow fix it for next
No worries.
time. But this is awesome. Thanks, guys. Catch you later.
All right. Bye, guys.